in more than 700 direct utterances by Mr. Bush or Mr. Cheney over the course of 1999 through mid-2004 on the subject of Iraq. Never once did they utter the statement that September 11th was related to Saddam Hussein or Iraq. They never actually said that in a single sentence.
How dare they subject us to such dishonor and disgrace?
He betrayed this country. He played on our fears.
Beyond and Cheney, how come they don't impeach these cats?
I hadn't noticed that it hadn't.
How come these guys aren't? Why don't they go after them?
Saddam Hussein and his government have lied consistently in the past. Originally, following the Persian Gulf War, they said they had no chemical weapons and they had no biological weapons. That proved to be a lie. His son-in-law defected, and his son-in-law's defection revealed that he had vast sums of chemical and biological weapons, and when confronted with the evidence, Hussein Kamil, when he went back, unfortunately, to Baghdad and was murdered almost immediately upon his return, but prior to that he talked about where we might look to find these. And then Iraq admitted that they had not a few amounts of chemical and biologicals. Anthrax, as you know, a very deadly chemical, or biological I should say. One single spore in your lungs and you will die within 5 days. He has 2,100 gallons of anthrax that they admitted to the UN inspectors. A proof they admitted this. VX, which is a very deadly nerve agent, a single drop on your finger and you will die within a couple of minutes. How much did he have? They admitted to having 3.9 tons of VX. There is something called ricin, which is extracted from castor beans. Now, from castor beans you can make castor oil, but you can also extract a poison. Just 6 or 7 beans would be enough to extract enough poison, ricin, for which there is no antidote to kill a human being within a very short period of time. They are growing hundreds of acres of castor beans. And so for the Iraqis to say we have no chemicals or biologicals, we are not engaged in producing these types of weapons of mass destruction, I think once again is proven to be a lie. Some of the missiles have been weaponized with anthrax. This came from a defector, the head of his intelligence, military intelligence service, who defected and went on national television in America, pointing out that a number of the missiles that he had in his possession were weaponized with anthrax. But they cannot be allowed to be hindered in the fashion they have been hindered. They cannot be told, you cannot go into this place, you cannot see this particular site, because if we do that, then we are in fact yielding to Saddam Hussein's tactics of deceit and deception. And the opportunity, I would bring a series of charts out to you, and one of the charts would be a photograph taken by an overhead system that was declassified. It's a very interesting chart. It shows a large facility, and I had several charts. This large facility at one point in time, about 6 minutes before a photograph was taken, shows a building with absolutely no activity around it. Let me assure you, this building was not a daycare center. It was a facility that was used by the Republican Guards. The UNSCOM inspectors announced they're on their way. They are held up for a period of 3 hours. The overhead imagery shows what? It showed a series, 17 vans pull up to that particular facility. And within another 20 minutes later, the vans have all been removed. And finally, the inspectors are allowed to come in. Now, I don't know what you would draw from that particular observation, but it's something what lawyers would call the doctrine of res ipsa loquitur. The thing speaks for itself. And
earlier today, I ordered America's armed forces to strike military and security targets in Iraq. They are joined by British forces. Their mission is to attack Iraq's nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons programs and its military capacity to threaten its neighbors.
I think when we have the complete record, you're going to discover that after 1998, it became a regime that was totally corrupt. Individuals were out for their own protection, and in a world where we know others are seeking WMD, the likelihood at some point in the future of a seller and a buyer meeting up and given the degraded state of American intelligence, quite frankly, if a willing buyer had come with a willing seller, I don't think we would have known. So
and expressing great appreciation for your service to our country.
I came not from within the administration, and it was clear in our discussions, and no one asked otherwise, that I would lead this the way I thought best, and I would speak the truth as we found it. I have had absolutely no pressure prior, during the course of the work at the ISG, or after I left to do anything otherwise. I'm convinced myself, if I had been there, presented what I have seen as the record of the intelligence estimates, I probably would have come to the, not probably, I would have come to the same conclusion that the political leaders did.
Dr. Kay, you also were quoted, and Senator Kennedy referred to it. I think if anyone was abused by the intelligence, it was the President of the United States rather than the other way around. Are you suggesting that the President was misled by the American intelligence community?
No, sir. What I'm suggesting is that the actual facts on the ground will turn out to be substantially different, at least with regard to large stockpiles, than the estimate before. I thought Iraq was actually a more dangerous place than we assumed in the NIE. Iraq.
Because every single Democratic senator had on his or her desk a 100-page summary of a U.S. intelligence called the National Intelligence Estimate. It's an official document supplied by the head of the CIA, who was a Clinton appointee. So they had all the intelligence that Bush had on the war when they voted for it and spoke eloquently in behalf of it.
The pre-war intelligence on Iraq was available to the members of the committee, and actually people who were not on the committee had access to the information if they came to the committee and sought it, which you can review and see what the Democrats who looked at the same intelligence were saying.
The President of the United States could do that without authorizing resolution from the United Nations.
We have an inherent right to use military force in self-defense, and that means under law, which is well established, that if there is an imminent threat to the United States, we don't have to wait for that threat to be implemented. We can't act against any imminent threat, whether or not there's a UN resolution covering that threat or not. If it's an imminent threat, we may act in self-defense.
In that case, the
threat Saddam Hussein did in fact pose. And in Senator Obama's recent book, he clearly says he thought that Saddam Hussein had chemical and biological weapons, and that he still coveted nuclear weapons.
John Kerry sat on the Intelligence Committee. He saw everything, had access to every piece of intelligence that George Bush did.
I don't mind, frankly, you know, a lot of folks voted the way we did because we had to vote, and there's a distinction. And we voted on the evidence we were given by an administration that misled us.
What is going to be the impact in terms of the region, in terms of what Saddam may do or what he may do? I'd be interested in the Senator's comment on that. And secondly, I'd be interested in the Senator's comment on the report this morning in the Washington Post. And I'm so glad that it was declassified, in which the Central Intelligence Agency effectively has agreed that unprovoked by U.S. military campaign, Iraqi Saddam Hussein is unlikely to initiate a chemical or biological attack against the United States. Intelligence agencies conclude in the classified report. That's the first time we've seen that public. That's been classified. Those of us who've been briefed on it have been unable to use that or to stay that. That's a major kind of factor, as I would think, if we are being asked to vote on a resolution of war.
Well, I have to say, this administration got us into a devastating war based on false pretenses.
Holding people accountable is what we do in this country.
Letting the president and the American people know that we are an equal branch of government to this president, who is down.
As we go through this, because I think if Saddam Hussein is around 5 years from now, we're in deep trouble as a country. We're in deep trouble.
Estimate of the possibilities of American troops being affected by the use of chemical warfare increases dramatically with the question when we are putting Saddam Hussein's back.
Why do you insist on not impeaching these people so that the world and America can really see the crimes that they've committed?
If somebody had a crime that the president had committed, that would be a different story.
Have things laid out in front of them is to get to the truth. Let's find out what the truth is.
I believe personally that the president did not intentionally mislead the American people, nor do I believe Prime Minister Blair would mislead the
NIE. That report made it clear that flawed intelligence, not administration deception, not administration pressure on analysts, was the basis for the policymakers' statements and decisions.
And let me take one of the explanations most commonly given. Analysts were pressured to reach conclusions that would fit the political agenda of one or another administration. I had innumerable analysts who came to me in apology that the world that we were finding was not the world that they had thought existed and that they had estimated. Reality on the ground differed in advance. And never, not in a single case, was the explanation, I was pressured to do this.
Interviewed 175 analysts and critics and some policymakers and others, and like your analysts at the ISG, not one said that they were intimidated or coerced or that their product was somehow manipulated.
Ask you, outside the CIA, from another agency or the White House or anybody else ask you to change your report?
No, I mean, I received, thoughts, which I solicited from people because I think, anybody who has a bright idea, I'm not averse to hearing it. But, no one tried to influence the outcome. And if they knew me, they would, they would realize they'd get the opposite reaction, if anything. I mean, I controlled the content.
No, it's clear now that we went to war under manipulated intelligence at best.
And many people may have made statements and did not review all of the intelligence.
There were other documents, such as the document before the Iraq War, which was put up there. Any member of the Senate could have read it, for instance, and only a very few, only 6 members of the Senate read that Iraq intelligence briefing. So Congress has
mistake. Do you wish you had read the National Intelligence Estimate, which had a lot of caveats from the State Department and the Energy Department as to whether or not Saddam Hussein really had a biological and chemical and active nuclear program?
I was fully briefed by the people who wrote that. I was briefed by the people from, the State Department, the CIA, the Department of Defense, all of the various players in that. And many people who read it, well, actually not very many people read the whole thing because we were getting constant briefings. And some people read it and voted for the resolution. Some people read it and voted against the resolution. I felt very well briefed. And it wasn't just what the Bush administration was telling us in the NIE. I went way outside of any kind of Bush administration sources, independent people, people from the Clinton administration, people in the British government. I looked as broadly as I could at how to assess this.
2001. And I refer you again, if you go back to Secretary Cohen's testimony before this committee, Secretary Cohen in the Clinton administration was not referring to anthrax that might be produced in some reconstituted program. He was referring to actual weapons. I remind you, it was Secretary Cohen who stood, I think, in this very committee room with 5 pounds of flour and talked about anthrax.
The entire Clinton National Security Team, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, and head of the CIA, supported the war in Iraq.
So it is with conviction that I support this resolution as being in the best interests of our nation, and it is a vote that says clearly to Saddam Hussein, this is your last chance. Disarm or be disarmed.
Did every single intelligence agency on earth that I know of, the British, our friends the French, the Germans, the Israelis, every single intelligence agency believed that, as our intelligence agency did, believed that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. How do you account for that?
He wanted to create the impression that he had more than he did.
So every intelligence agency was fooled by him?
Well, not including, to a certain extent, the Iraqi intelligence agency, because there were many Iraqis who were not convinced that there either were or were not special weapons within their arsenal.
And so it was a powerful deception technology. We have it, but we haven't seen it, but we know that someone else has it.
Iraqis generally knew a lot more about us than we did about them. For various reasons, their ability and desire to conceal their intentions and capabilities were quite good. For example, we cannot yet definitively say whether or not WMD materials were transferred out of Iraq before the war. Neither can we definitively answer some questions about possible retained stocks. What we found, the Army raided a facility called the Al-Aboud laboratory in an area of Baghdad, which is known as the chemical souk. And by chance, they found a person there who was working on some ricin. And so we quickly got involved in that. We quickly began to debrief him and, ferret out his contacts and, work a link analysis, et cetera. We pursued a series of raids pursuant to that. And we, put together a picture of a series of efforts and a number of individuals who were trying to, put chemical agent of various sorts into munitions, including mortar rounds. We think we've got most of that particular activity not under control, but we have the analysts and the ability to react quickly allowed us to get ahead of this problem, and I'm quite proud of what
I'm glad you did.
But it has certainly been the case that characters like Zarqawi has expressed an interest in exactly this type of weapon.
News for John McCain, and that is that there was no such thing as Al-Qaeda in Iraq until George Bush and John McCain decided to invade Iraq.
To find out, as Charles Dolfer stated in a recent briefing, and I quote, "We just didn't have the resources to check all sites," end quote.
No, sir.
So to the best of your knowledge, insurgents and Iraqi groups still desire to acquire and use chemical weapons if they can get them.
Yes,
for example, I was told that at least 1.5 tons of deadly nerve agent, the VX, were unaccounted for. What, in your opinion, happened to all of those chemical agents and biological agents?
King Abdullah II of Jordan. A conversation, how much of it is from outside?
There is an element from outside. You can't quantify that. Obviously, you have the sort of the Al-Qaeda links with the sort of Zarqawi. You have foreign fighters coming through. We caught, just on my way to the United States, a car bomb was exploded on the Iraqi side of our border, killing, I think, 4 American soldiers. The second car came into our territory. The police managed to knock the vehicle out. The vehicle overturned. We caught the driver. He's a foreign fighter, and had crossed into Iraq with many others to carry out suicide bombings.
You have an arrest warrant here out for Zarqawi because he's implicated in the killing of an American.
Yes, Mr. Foley, 2 years ago, but he was also responsible for many other attempted terrorist actions inside of Jordan. The most recent was a large chemical attack that he wanted to undertake in the country that would have cost thousands of Jordanian lives.
Where did the VX and anthrax go?
Television, the newspaper. If you ask the average American today, if any weapons of mass destruction, even today, before this hearing is aired, if there are any weapons of mass destruction, any chemical weapons found in Iraq, I think 99.9% of them are going to tell you, no, I've been listening to television and radio.
They're going to say no. There aren't. That's been asserted. I've seen this has been the order of the day.
Dancing around and focusing on other issues. The fact of the matter is, there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq at the time we invaded in 2002, because you're finding them.
We are finding these chemical munitions in Iraq, and they were there at the time of the invasion.
You found additional weapons?
Yes, sir. I believe we have, and that'll be covered in the classified portion.
There were going to be weapons of mass destruction there. And I do recall Chairman Warner, and at least 4 or maybe 6 times, asking leading witnesses, if we undertake this war, are we going to find weapons of mass destruction when it's over? And everyone said yes, and one of those was General Abizaid.
We challenged the Bush administration when they wouldn't tell the truth about weapons of mass destruction, and they tried to destroy us for speaking out.
The basis for the accusation that George Bush lied was 16 words in the State of the Union of 2003. This was just 2 months before the war, in which he said, and this is practically verbatim, the British have reported that Iraq was seeking yellow cake uranium, that's fissionable uranium, in Niger. Niger happens to have 2 exports. One is chickpeas and the other is fissionable uranium. The 16 words, Bush was accused of lying about this by a renegade CIA officer named Valerie Plame and her husband, Joseph Wilson, who have been exposed as liars since. But the words were 100% true. All George Bush said was that the British have reported this, and the British maintained, never wavered from their position that Saddam Hussein was seeking the uranium. And in fact, there were 2 bipartisan commissions, one a bipartisan Senate commission in the United States, and the other the Butler Commission in England, which investigated this whole story and Joseph Wilson's claims and found that Bush was accurate, and it was a well-founded claim that Saddam Hussein sought fissionable uranium in Niger.
The British government has learned that Saddam Hussein recently sought significant quantities of uranium from Africa.
Because certainly Saddam Hussein was a threat. He'd used WMD on his own people. There was no question he was a troublemaker. He was, you know, his history was not good. That with Joe's credentials, my airtight cover, my covert identity, my affiliation with the CIA as part of their...
When I was outed on July 14, 2003, I was, until that moment, covert.
And that means what?
That means that no one outside of a very small circle knew where I really
Use your head. Here's a woman who drives every morning from her home to Langley, to the CIA headquarters. Is she really very much of a secret agent? Do you think really that our adversaries in this town, who keep an eye on everything, are that? She was not a covert agent at that time. She had been brought back from an overseas assignment. She was classified. Almost everybody who works over at the CIA is classified. It was not the White House. I had an interview with, it was on background, with the Deputy Secretary of State, Richard Armitage, who was a critic of the invasion of Iraq. And for full disclosure, so was I. I was opposed to that invasion. But in the course of our conversation, we talked about the 16 words that you have mentioned, and the fact that the CIA had sent Ambassador Wilson, who was a Democrat, who was a supporter of Al Gore, who was a Clinton White House aide, who was very critical of the president. They had sent him on a confidential mission. And I said to Dick Armitage, Rich Armitage, I said, why did they send him? And he said, because his wife suggested it. She works at the CIA, and I put that in the column. Independent prosecutor, Mr. Fitzgerald, spent millions of dollars trying to find if a crime was committed, and he couldn't find a crime. There was no violation of the U.S. Secret Agents Identity Act, which has a very high standard. And the missing, Colonel, the missing part of Mrs. Wilson's book is Armitage. He's barely even mentioned, and there's just reams and reams about Karl Rove because they wanted to pin that on a sinister plot involving Rove, Dick Cheney, and the president.
Hey, Bob. The answer to all of the above is no.
Check him out. And it is unmistakable that we now have Saddam in our hands.
When you eyeballed him, what went through your mind?
Evil. An evil man.
Was it wise for us to go there at all?
Well, you know, my normal answer is that that is a question that, knowing everything that we knew at the time, it was the right decision. Everybody supports it.
At the same time, the Bush administration is exactly the same time, September of 2002, the fall of 2002. At the same time, the Bush administration was misleading the American people about the threat of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
Just to be clear, you're accusing the CIA of lying to you in September of 2002.
Misleading the Congress of the United States.
In a report that was done 2 years ago, the cost of the war in Iraq will exceed $3 trillion.
And then depending on which report it is, anywhere from 700,000 up to 1.2 million Iraqis that have died during this.
The lying to the United States Congress is a crime.
Accusing the CIA and other intelligence officials of lying or misleading the Congress, then she should come forward with evidence and turn that over to the Justice Department so be prosecuted.
Discussion about what's been withheld and whether Congress was informed has to do with whether Congress can do the oversight that we're obligated to do on behalf of the citizens.
Should a president of the United States lie to the American people? Should a president of the United States engage in the systematic deception of the American people?
Raises questions about our constitutional responsibility to be a check and balance to administration abuse of power. If, in fact, we're in a war that's based on lies and we have thousands of troops whose lives are on the line every day, we owe it to them and we owe it to the American people to set straight the public record.
What the Congresswoman described is a crime, and she's correct. It is a mandatory subject for investigation. Lying, withholding information to Congress is a crime. And
here's the statute. Except as otherwise provided in this section, whoever in any manner within the jurisdiction of the executive, legislative, or judicial branches of the government of the United States knowingly and willfully falsifies, conceals, or covers up by any trick, scheme, or device a material fact, makes any material, false, fictitious, fraudulent statement or representation, or makes or uses any false writing or document knowing the same to contain materially false or fictitious, fraudulent statements or entry, shall be fined under this title, imprisoned not more than 5 years if the offense involves international or domestic terrorism, as defined in Section 2331, imprisoned not more than 8 years or both if the matter relates to an offense under Chapter 1009A, B, 1010, 1017 of Section 1591, then the term of imprisonment imposed under this section shall be not more than 8 years.
And nobody's talking about prosecution.
VX, which is a very deadly nerve agent. How much did he have? They admitted to having 3.9 tons.
Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, terrorist bin Laden called the Prince of al-Qaeda in Iraq.
have the sort of the Al-Qaeda links with the sort of Zarqawi. You have
an arrest warrant here out for Zarqawi because he's implicated in the killing of an American.
Yes, he was also responsible for many other attempted terrorist actions inside of Jordan. The most recent was a large chemical attack that he wanted to undertake in the country that would have cost thousands of Jordanian lives.
3 weeks later, Al-Qaeda releases an audio tape in which bin Laden calls Zarqawi a brave knight. He adds, "We will continue, God willing, fighting you and your allies until you go back defeated." June 8, 2006. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, prince of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, is confirmed dead, killed when Air Force F-16s bomb a safe house north of Baghdad.
We know that Iraq and Al-Qaeda have had high-level contacts that go back a decade. We've learned that Iraq has trained Al-Qaeda members in bomb making, in poisons, and deadly gases.
Iraq has sent bomb-making and document forgery experts to work with Al-Qaeda. Iraq has also provided Al-Qaeda with chemical and biological weapons training.
He's a threat because he is dealing with Al-Qaeda.
Simply stated, there is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has weapons of mass destruction. There is no doubt that he is amassing them to use against our friends, against our allies, and against us.
Those claims about Al-Qaeda and the weapons program all turned out to be 100% grade A hooey. They were not true. And outside the Cheney family dinner table, no one argues they are true anymore.
Anybody interested? Anybody buying what these folks are selling now?
Partly because he's still trying to link Saddam Hussein to weapons of mass destruction.
As I assess various media entities, some are unquestionably engaged in political propaganda within our own country that is uncontrolled.
On behalf of our producers, Kathleen Glynn and Michael Donovan from Canada.
For some of you, just like some of our politicians, the truth is of little to no value if it does not fit your own preconceived notions, biases, or agendas.
Because we like nonfiction. We like nonfiction and we live in fictitious times. We live in a time where we have fictitious election results that elects a fictitious president. We live in a time where we have a man sending us to war for fictitious reasons, whether it's the fictition of duct tape or the fictitious of orange alerts. We are against this war, Mr. Bush. Shame on you, Mr. Bush. Shame on you. And anytime you've got the Pope and the Dixie Chicks against you, your time is up. Thank you very much.
And have allowed external agendas to manipulate what the American public sees on TV, what they read in our newspapers, and what they see and read on the web.
Right? They lied, Valerie. They lied. That's the truth.
Where did that intel come from? Do you want me to double check the target number for you? No, we're in the right location. The schematic's right. But who did it originate with? I mean, hey, did this come from the United Nations?
According to this data, Chief, this is our intel.
Yeah, but how would they think something was there? It's the third straight time.
If we don't do this, who's gonna do it? This is the job. These politicians, these journalists, everybody that says, oh, well, if we'd known then what we know now, it was all right there. We knew it. If we had bothered to connect the dots. But we didn't, did we? We just rolled over, right?
So what happens if you're wrong, Janine?
Including during prime time at the Republican National Convention.
Please, my friends. He's certainly not a disingenuous filmmaker.
Why had it been left to McCain's disingenuous...
Run the story. You don't like the way Michael Moore does it? You think it's too polemical or biased? Fine. Run the hard news, buddy.
He was also responsible for many other attempted terrorist actions inside of Jordan. The most recent was a large chemical attack that he wanted to undertake in the country that would have cost thousands of Jordanian lives.
We're going to turn right now to another scandal involving Karl Rove, the outing of former CIA agent Valerie Plame. The Bush administration outed her in retaliation for her husband Joe Wilson's accusations that President Bush lied about Iraq's alleged efforts to purchase uranium from Niger before the Iraq War. It was the whole deceit around weapons of mass destruction. Let's begin by playing the famous comment of Joe Wilson in 2003.
At the end of the day, it's of keen interest to me to see whether or not we can get Karl Rove frog marched out of the White House in handcuffs.
The High Court also handed a victory to former Vice President Dick Cheney and several other Bush administration figures. Justices refused to consider a lawsuit brought by former CIA employee Valerie Plame. She and her husband claim the officials conspired to leak her name to reporters in an effort to compromise her status as a covert agent. The lawsuit had been dismissed by lower courts. The White House